And then I know in the introduction to one of your books you were saying that in 1983 there's a little bit of a crisis in the Zen Center, and somehow the meditation wasn't moving people beyond a certain point. Am I correct in my phraseology there?
Yes. I would maybe say it another way too. We had gotten stuck with what I now call some shadows of the spiritual, of the Buddhist world, where we weren't well integrating the enlightened experience in with the psychological. And so there were some problems. And that was when we invited Hal and Sidra Stone, who had discovered the voice dialogue process. They're the creators of the voice dialogue. Hal had been a Jungian analyst and his wife a psychotherapist, and they had started exploring different kinds of therapy. And they together came up with what was called voice dialogue. So we invited them out in '83, and then I spent about 9 or 10 months studying with them and training several times a week, and using the voice dialogue to begin to integrate the spiritual in a more psychologically sound way.
Yes, because I can imagine you're just sitting there with your thoughts and process all those years, and unless there's a way to deal with tangles and difficult situations, it kind of congeals. It must do. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, you said tangles. I call them knots, okay. And I call them barriers and knots and kinks that come up. Right. Imagine a hose, a garden hose, that gets a kink in it, and so it stops flowing.
Yes.
We were getting some kinks in our hose.
And just very briefly, how does voice dialogue work? Just in a couple of minutes, just a very brief summary.
Well, basically, what it is, the basic premise is that we all have every aspect that is out there in anybody else within us. So if you have an ability to get angry, I do too. But it could be disowned. In other words, I could say, I'm not an angry person. I never get angry. And what it is that I've disowned my anger for whatever reason, that it's not acceptable. I was trained that boys shouldn't, kids shouldn't get angry or whatever. Or maybe fear is disowned. I never get afraid of anything. What that means is we've suppressed it. So the voice dialogue is about re-owning these parts of ourselves that maybe were there at one time, or maybe we suppressed them very early on, and we're not in touch with them. We're not open to them. And so it's like if we were a whole pie, a part of the pie is missing because it's been buried down in the basement. A nice analogy, I think, is if you have children, and some of the kids you give a really nice name to, like Sugar, Honey, Blossom, Flower, and others you give really horrible names to, like Rage, Bigotry, Hatred, Jealousy, and you take all the ones that you give a negative name to and you put them down in the basement and you lock them down there. And you don't give them access to the home, access to the fridge, to the TV, and so forth. And then they come out, they react. They react in a way that undermines the home because they want attention, they want love, they want recognition, they want it to be appreciated, and they don't get that. So the way the voice dialogue works, at least this is the way I work with it, is you want to bring them out of the basement. You want to introduce them to the family, and you want to begin to appreciate that every voice does have a function. Even the negative ones have a function. And so we work on looking what is the positive and negative function, what's the immature and the mature version of each voice. Because obviously there's an immature kind of anger, and there's a more mature kind of anger, a way of expressing anger. And it actually, on the most enlightened level, it actually can become what we call Vajra wisdom, which is the cutting sword wisdom, which cuts through delusion, which cuts through ignorance. So that's what we're looking for.
And of course, if a voice is suppressed, it's going to come out at inconvenient times, isn't it?
Exactly.
You're not really going to have any control.
Inappropriately,
Yeah.
inconveniently,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is you want to bring them to consciousness.
Yes.
You want to bring them to a state of consciousness where they're well integrated in your life, and then they become tools rather than weapons being used against you. They become tools for your life, assets.
I understand. Well, one of the things that really interested me was that you have these 5 stages of, I can't, it's not on my notes
I call it
here.
the human being.
The
5
human being,
stages
that's the human
path of
being,
the
that's
human
right,
being.
yeah. Let's run through those 5 stages and look at them in a bit of detail, because I certainly have some questions about where other people that I've interviewed may possibly fit into this, and I'm just intrigued to see if there is a map to be followed here somehow. So let's take stage 1. I think from what I've read in your book is that stage 1 pretty much is what happened to you in the desert. Would you
Correct. Stage 1 is an initial opening, a glimpse where we have a glimpse of a higher state of consciousness, of oneness, of beingness. That's stage 1. So it's this shift in consciousness. So that's what happened to me very suddenly, and stage 1 is always a sudden. It could be preceded by years and years of meditation or training, but when it happens, it's always a sudden realization. That's stage 1.
And that could be called a Satori experience from other ways of looking at things.
From a Zen standpoint, a Satori or Kensho experience.
Okay. And so that is where we have a glimpse of a non-dualistic approach.
Exactly.
Because most of us think we're separate, and we think everything around us is separate. And even though we might read a book or read lots of books about us all being one, it's quite hard to get through the mind. It comes almost as a quantum thing, doesn't it?
Exactly. In fact, it's almost impossible to get through the mind.
Yes.
It's like the little mind trying to grasp the big mind, and it just can't. It's ungraspable. So it has to be a shift. An analogy that I've come to like very much is you think of a railroad track with 2 rails, okay? And let's say the left rail is the dualistic rail. And let's imagine that you've got one of these little carts, that you pump. You ever seen those? Right. Where you're on that rail, and you're just on that rail, and you're pumping, and you look way down the line, and you can see that these 2 rails come together. At some point,
right,
they come together. So maybe that's what you're seeking. You're seeking something where they merge, and you want this experience. You don't know what it is. You might call it enlightenment, but you're not sure what it is. And so you start pumping harder and moving faster and working harder. But as far as you go, there's still off in the distance the same amount. And you never can seem to get there because it's a different rail. It's an illusion that they come together. But the little mind doesn't understand that you can't jump from time and space to beyond time and space without making that leap. I mean, you can't merge. You have to make the leap. You have to make the jump. So imagine that all of a sudden you find yourself on the other rail in the non-dual. So the one rail is the dual, and the other rail is the non-dual. And I think it corresponds maybe with the left brain, right brain.
But this is the frustration of so many people who are often genuine seekers. They do their meditation, they read the books, they go to the workshops, they try and be great people in life, and still it doesn't happen.
And it
doesn't appear to happen.
That's right. And that's what the big mind is, and that's why big mind has become so successful so quickly, because it offers people this opportunity to make that shift, to make that leap, because years and years and years of meditation on a cushion. I taught traditional Zen for almost 30 years. You can sit there for 20, 30 years and not have a true opening, a true enlightenment like that. In the big mind work, it makes it accessible and feasible for just about anybody who wishes to do that.
Okay.
And the reason, it's very simple why it works. I mean,
why does it work?
Okay.